Hello, everybody. Welcome to our AEC Senior Executive Briefing for October 13th, 2022. Thanks for joining us. It's always hard to believe how quickly it seems like we just had our conversation with Bjorn and Michael and Frank on mergers and acquisitions, but believe it or not, that was a month ago. So thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We are just freshly off the heels of our AEC Thrive conference. For those of you not familiar with that, that's our annual conference of CEOs, CFOs, COO, principals, all sorts of folks from architecture and engineering firms. This year we were in Nashville. It was 2 weeks ago. And we also had our AEC Talent Max event, which was the second annual occurrence of that, which was our one-day conference immediately preceding that. Obviously, I don't have to tell you folks, finding talent continues to be a top of mind issue for a lot of firms. And that was our one-day event focused on tips and tricks and tactics for finding and keeping the best talent. So what I thought would be kind of fun today would be to recap some of the key takeaways and also a little bit of an interesting case study on some things that one firm is doing as a little bit of an unconventional way to tackle the talent issue. Before we get into our discussion, of course, I do want to make a few housekeeping remarks. Number one, if you've registered for today's live broadcast, you will get an email from me within about 24 hours, as usual, with a link to the recording, as well as some other information. If you have a question for me or for any of our guests during the broadcast today, you can enter that in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. You can also enter any comments or tips or ideas that you took away if you happen to join us at Thrive in the chat function on the side of your screen. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what you took away. I think we can all benefit, even if you did not attend Thrive. I think you'll benefit from a lot of these things, and we're going to cover we're going to go from tech to HR to BD. To just about everything. And in fact, I don't even know what the takeaways are from our guests today. So I'll be hearing them for the first time myself. But we'll try to make sure they're really relevant and actionable. So like I said, if you didn't join us, it still has some degree of context. Makes sense? All right, here we go. So I want to start, before I bring in our first guest, talk about a couple key things that I took away from the event. Lessons learned, ideas, kind of thought-provoking questions that have been lingering in my head. The first thing that really jumped out at me, one of the topics we've covered many times in this broadcast is what's the right mix or what's the right model for hybrid or in-office or fully remote. A year ago, I think the sense was there would be this kind of optimal model that all firms would gravitate towards. And honestly, for a while, I thought that optimal model was the 3 days in the office, 2 days remote hybrid, which seems to be getting a fair amount of traction. But I was really surprised to hear that there are some firms, some big successful firms that are 5 days a week in the office. And these are firms that are winning Best Firm to Work For awards and all sorts of stuff like that, Employer of Choice awards. So it's not a kind of done deal that hybrid is the best mix. Now, I think the reality is it really depends on a lot of other factors with respect to your culture, your client mix, and your team dynamics. Dave Burstein had some findings at in his kind of State of the Industry Outlook, where he studied a bit. For those of us who know Dave, knows that he's always going to bring the data, and he didn't fail to deliver this time. He studied a bit if there's a correlation in profitability, financial performance, growth, those sorts of things. If there's a correlation to work from home or in office, he couldn't find one. There were some hypotheses that one model is going to be more profitable, one model is going to work better, and there was not a correlation. And I just felt that kind of bore out throughout the 2-day event, there are firms in all aspects of that. In fact, we just did a poll of attendees who are going to our AEC Senior Executive Forum, which is next week in Newport, Rhode Island. And of those folks, I think it was about 10% who are fully remote, And the rest was evenly split right down the middle between hybrid and 100% in the office. So I thought that was interesting, that there is no kind of optimal model yet. Here we are late in 2022, looking at around the corner to 2023, and it seems like there's still kind of a mixed bag on that. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. The answer I was given once when I was back in business school many years ago, one of the professors says the answer to any question you get when you're an MBA is it depends. That's the answer to everything, and I think that's the case with these operating models. It depends on a lot of different factors. Another thing that was really interesting. So we had a session on artificial intelligence, which is something that we're starting to hear more and more buzz on in the industry. For some folks, I think it still seems like it's really far out that we might see artificial intelligence play a role in design. But I think it's coming a lot faster than any of us think. And this speaker raised more of a provocative question that I'd ask you all to kind of take away when you're thinking about the war for talent and you're thinking about how to find the best people and how you're ever gonna kind of get on top of this. This speaker, Erica Orange was her name, she has a group called the Future Hunters, asked this question of maybe it needs to shift, or maybe it is shifting from who will do the work to what will do the work. Now, her kind of thesis and her argument was this kind of joint human robotics model works best. Or we're not going to have robots designing the entire building or anything like that, but kind of this hybrid model where robots and humans work together, or as she referred to it, I think if I have it correctly, carbon-based and non-carbon-based brains that collaborate. So AI is coming, I think, faster than, like any disruption, coming faster than we think. So that's a big kind of strategic open question. Shifting gears again to, well, staying on recruiting, but shifting gears to a much more tactical level. Barb Bruno, who always brings the goods in terms of real specific actionable ideas. Barb is a HR recruiting expert across all industries, not just architecture and engineering. And she really tried to drive home the point that the traditional recruiting methods, this idea that it's hard to find people is true, but the firms who are really kind of leading on the leading edge here are doing some of the basic tasks really, really well. And here's an example of a super, super basic task that she offered some insight on. So if you have in-house recruiters, internal recruiters, or even if you're tasking your project managers or principals with reaching out to potential talent, she did an exercise where folks could sort of say how they would leave a voicemail with a potential recruit. And obviously a lot of those messages end up being very firm-centric, very me-centric, why we're so great and why you should come work for us. So she gave us, I'm going to look at, so I can read it correctly, I'm going to look at the paper. She gave us a script for a voicemail message that will absolutely cut through the clutter and get results. And candidly, I would argue this is equally as valuable for sales as it is for recruiting. Here we go. Take note of this. And again, like I said, if you registered for today's broadcast, you'll get the recording with this. You don't have to scribble it down. My name is X. Someone suggested we talk. When you call me back, please tell whoever answers the line to interrupt me no matter what I'm doing. I don't want to miss your call. Again, this is X and my number is Y. So the idea was, she said that was a message that's very focused on the recipient of it. And it has a sense of importance and urgency that cuts through any ego and creates a level of curiosity, I think. So if you're looking for some talent out there and you can't get them to engage with you, try that. A very simple tactic. The other thing, one last thing I want to take away, and then we're going to get to our guests here. I thought there was one thing we've talked about in a few different ways is that there's a refocus on marketing and business development that didn't really exist for the past year or two. I think for a lot of firms over the past year or so, finding work has been the least of their challenges, pursuant to what I just described about finding people. But we're starting to see an increased emphasis on finding work and business development. I've heard comments that immediate short-term backlog in some markets remains very strong, but in other markets, it is starting to soften a little bit. And that's geographically, that's client market. There's some unevenness that's starting to happen. And Dave Burstein's quarterly market forecast report, for those of you who looked at it in the member portal, probably saw that as well, the markets that were have been extremely hot, like housing, are starting to cool off a bit. Anyway, I thought Frank Lazaro of CERM had an excellent session on social media marketing, and something I hadn't really thought of, and it was simple but brilliant, and that is to start to segment your social media strategy based on the channel. So he talked about, for example, with LinkedIn, focus really on thought leadership and content that might attract potential clients. But what was interesting was with Instagram, which I would always think, you kind of do the same thing on all these channels. That's the channel to really use to articulate your culture, to really kind of show who you are and what you do to potential employees, potential recruits. So I thought that's interesting to talk to your marketing folks about maybe segmenting your social media strategy. Don't just push out the same message on all the platforms. Segment it a bit based on the platform. So those are a few of my key takeaways. I'm sure some folks joining us have a bunch too, but I also have some guests here who are going to share some great tips and tricks as well. So I'd like to, with that, invite our first guest to join me. This is Desta Kimmel of Powers Brown Architecture. Desta, if you want to jump on there. Hey there, Desta. Thanks for joining me. So Desta is, it's great to have you. Desta is the Chief Administrative Officer with 130-person firm Powers Brown Architecture. Headquartered in Texas, the firm has offices in the US and Canada and operates in a wide range of client markets. Additionally, Powers Brown Architecture is a Circle of Excellence firm, for those of you not aware of that. That is the top 20% across 12 key financial performance metrics in our financial performance survey. So congrats to that too, Desta. And
thank you.
Recognized amongst our other award winners at Thrive. So
thank you. Yeah, I would say just a note on how quickly all that changes. So I think that probably came from our Circle of Excellence kind of synopsis. We're at 160 now.
160. So,
yeah, and could go to, are probably going to go to 200 by the end of the first quarter of next year. So yeah.
Wow. So all right, let's talk about that for one quick second. What's the secret to find these people to grow so fast?
Oh, yeah, that's the struggle, I think, for everyone is really trying to find those people. I mean, we're lucky in a lot of ways that we're in multiple markets, and so that helps us focus on areas where we can find staff. The difference of that being is not every market has a great amount that you can pull from. So, we try to look at some of the what for us are smaller markets and just try to staff up there as possible.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit too about it. What is your operating model right now? Hybrid, in-office, remote, all of the above?
So we are full-time in the office. We started when we started the year with 10 days of work from home, just to we wanted to gauge kind of how that all looked. So employees had 10 days that they could use to work from home, for various reasons. But we will, at the beginning of 2023, we're going to up that to be 30 days of work from anywhere. So, we've kind of seen, looked at how that 10 days of work from home went. We know that we're competing with firms that are 100% going to be hybrid. We don't want to do the hybrid because we feel like in a lot of ways it penalizes your stronger staff. It penalizes your senior leadership, your project managers, the people that can't, don't have the ability to say, oh, I can always work from home Tuesday, Thursday, and part of it is to, as our CEO says, have a bit of randomness so that people don't think oh, well, it's Tuesday. You know what? I can go to my yoga class at 3:00 on Tuesdays because I'm always work from home. The other thing, this sounds, kind of bad, but we also have people that come to interview with us and say, oh, I can interview on Thursday because that's my work from home day. So they're building a life around the fact that they are not ever going to be in the office on a certain day. And so, for us, we feel like if when the time comes, if we're able, if circumstances mean that we've got to all come back full time, it's going to be a lot harder for people to say but I've built my life around being at home on these 2 days per week. And I think it helps people, for when an emergency pops up. If something happens on a Wednesday, but your work from home days are Tuesday, Thursday, like what do you do? You know, it's like you've already established what your schedule is. So we're going to see how it goes. You know, a lot of it depends on your people and how committed they are to, you know, trying to keep that going, if that makes sense. You know, understanding that there is, it is a benefit, but there's also a responsibility that goes with it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, this is not your first year as the Circle of Excellence firm winner. What's the secret? I mean, if there's one thing you could point to that you feel like you're doing right, that's getting those sort of results, what is it?
Ooh, I mean, we kind of say that we have 3 P's, right? It's like people, processes, and then this is a little bit of a stretch, but the ability to pivot. So, you know, obviously it's about our staff, you know, 100%, because that's who the clients interface with. That's who's producing, you know, producing work. That is really number one, is having great people. Number 2 is process. So, you know, we committed, I would say probably 10 years ago, we committed to have a single quality department within our firm. So we have a director of quality, and her team checks every set of drawings. They handle our training program. They are pushing us forward into making sure that you know, a set of drawings that you get from one office is going to look like a set of drawings you get from a second office. That really it is a you know, a set standard of what our you know, what production you get, what deliverables you get, but also to try and help the experience be the same between, you know, one project team to another project team.
Yeah, you know, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what's interesting is I'll often hear that from firms that have grown rapidly in a relatively short period of time. It's especially true if they grow through acquisition, but even organically, sometimes there's that comment from clients, from their clients, they ain't what they used to be. You know, the quality has slipped, or you know, they've become much more inwardly focused and not as nimble. It sounds like you're getting in front of that. And
yeah, and we have. I mean, I will say that, you know, obviously, I think the past 2 years for everyone has been complicated, and I don't think that, you know, I think that while I think we're still operating at a very high level, I don't know that we're at the optimal that we were, say, at the beginning of 2020. You know, I think that that's kind of one of those things that we're really trying to work back through. Oh, I was going to add just one quick thing that related to that, back to Thrive, that one of the things that people talked about is that on the surface, it seems that productivity has pretty much stayed the same, right? With everybody being at home or not being at home. But one gentleman had raised the question, and I brought this back as a question for us. It's really going to be hard for all of us to say that until we can go back and actually audit our projects and figure out what was the quality that we produced, right? Because it's really easy to look at it and say, like, people were billable at the same level, and you know, we still met our deadlines, and we you know, we did the things that on the surface look like we were exactly as productive as we were in the office. But it's really going to be after we can go back and look, like how many errors did we have in drawings? How many RFIs and submittals did we have? You know, how many change orders were caused by something missing in a drawing set? You know, so there is that level of productivity too, that I think as an industry, we're going to have to go back and look at, but that's going to take some time to kind of wash out, depending on, you know, obviously the timetable for how quickly projects are getting built in your own firm.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So tell me a little bit about, before we get into your Thrive takeaways. So you've got kind of a unique model. You know, as I said at the outset, finding talent, biggest bottleneck. Even firms, especially in the public sector side, are saying, you know, there's just more work than the resources to do the work. And there are the traditional kind of offshore outsourcing models that exist, and some firms use those successfully. But you've kind of taken a different approach. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we like to call it onshoring. So in I have to think back which year it was. It may have been 2014. Inadvertently, one of our partners has a wife who's an executive for a major oil and gas company. And she, on her leadership track, had to go manage a division outside of the US. So therefore, they had to move their family to Atlantic Canada. And you know, the way that the ownership structure was set up, was that, he could pause his ownership piece. And then once, they came back from this kind of tour of duty out of the US and pick it back up. Or we decided that, why don't you go and just see what you can do there? Let's take a chance that you may be able to get some work. So they did it. We built a kind of a small office there. Then when the time came for him to come back, at that point, we had already figured out that, look, we're going to stay in Canada. We opened a Toronto office. But what we realized was in Atlantic Canada, there are a lot of really good, I have to think, we can't call them architectural drafters anymore because it's but technical drafters. So they have a 2-year architectural drafting degree program, and they cannot become architects without going back to the mainland of Canada and attending a 4-year university. So there's a great pool of potential employees there that have the skills. And so what we did is we decided we would build up that studio. So we've got, I think at this point, we've got 18 in-house, because they're our employees, what we like to call, architectural drafters. So they are basically taking design from the US for, not to bore you guys with the product, but basically they are doing the drafting. So they are doing the modeling and the drafting for a variety of projects, and then those come back to the US. So they're still managed by a project manager in the US. They're still project architects. They're still the staff in the US, but that bulk of drafting and modeling is going to that staff who has the ability to kind of turn it around quickly and then kick it back to the staff in the US to then pick it up and remanage the project.
Yeah, and then that probably ties back into what you said earlier about having a director of quality. That, one of the common concerns I have with traditional offshore outsourcing is preserving quality. But it sounds like you've got some infrastructure in place that hasn't been an issue.
Right, and that's some of the bulk of that is that they are us, right? Like there's no differentiation. They just happen to be in that office, if that makes sense. And so they have ownership of their work because they know this is their work, and we'll know that this is their work, right? So they have pride of work because they know that. The quality piece. I would say as we all start getting into and paying more attention to ESG as well, the thing for us is we know that they are being paid a fair wage. They are covered under insurance. They have they have the additional overlay of benefits that we offer to all of our candidates in Canada. So we know that, that in this, we're doing the right thing, versus sometimes if you're not really doing a lot of due diligence for offshoring, you really don't know like how they're treating their employees. Like, we know that they get paid vacations, they get holidays, they're working an acceptable 40, sometimes 45-hour week, depending on deadlines, but, they're not working a ridiculous amount of hours either. So we know that, for us, that's really important. And which happened to just be a side piece of, right, like as we started working through why we wanted to do that, that was something that was really kind of important to us, was to make sure.
And they're employees of Powers Brown Architecture.
Yeah, they're no different than anybody that sits in our Houston office, our DC office, anywhere, Toronto, like it's all the same. And I will say we do have some staff in Toronto that do this as well, but the main piece of that is in that Atlantic Canada office. Kind of going back to the quality piece, sorry to jump around a little bit, but one of the things that many years ago, when we were really just doing work in AutoCAD, just simply AutoCAD, it was very easy to send something to an offshore, to send it to India or Asia or and other places, because everybody kind of did the same thing. We realized once we shifted into using Revit and we were building our own templates and our own families, it became much more complicated, because those are things that you don't want to share, right? You spend a lot of overhead building these things, right? And they're proprietary. Like, you don't want somebody else to just have the things that you worked really hard and spend a lot of man hours building to have access to that. And so without sending your templates and your families out to someone that can pretty much do with them what they choose, that you don't know, that was a big hiccup for us. Also, because we were early Revit movers, there weren't a lot of offshoring groups at that time that were solid in Revit. We tried it.
Sure.
We got back stuff that was kind of a little bit, I don't want to say a little bit garbage. It spent us a lot more time to go back, fix it, and remodel and draw things than it really saved us in the offshoring piece.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so then in the time we have left here, a quick lightning round of your key takeaways here. I hope I didn't steal anyone's thunder here with my takeaways at the outset, but your key takeaways from Thrive here.
I think they were good. Like they overlap, right? So one of the things is not fully AI, but for us, like automation of tasks. Like what can we automate? Like what can we do that saves people time? And part of that is, what do we already have software in place that can help save man hours? How are we going to do that? So that was number one. Number two was thinking about how to hire non-traditional architecture staff to do work. One of the things kind of ties back into number one, like could we use a software coder that could help build scripts into Revit for us that then would automate tasks that then you wouldn't have to use, staff to build. Just kind of all of that. What can you peel off from a project manager that really could be done by someone who doesn't have to have an architecture degree? Like you don't have to build a schedule, to help with fees, to do some of the more administrative type tasks. Could we do that? Would that be a better option while we struggle to find staff, going forward?
Yeah.
And then I would say the third one that I would add is just kind of helping leadership in general, like not just partners, but also project managers and directors, understand the shift in dynamics of managing workforce of the future, right? We all know by 2025, 70% of the workforce is going to be millennials and Gen X, and they are different. They're different than all of us. And we all keep trying to manage them as we were managed or as we learned. And so I'm like, part of that is helping everybody understand what got us here isn't going to get us there. So how do we have to adapt? Because I think we all know they are not going to adapt. And we're living in a dream world if we think that that's what's going to happen, that we're going to break their will and break their spirit and turn them into many us's to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, the paraprofessional, what I'd call model, is something we've been talking about for some time here, is, fighting the traditional recruiting model with this, fighting that nail with the same hammer that everybody else is fighting with. It's sort of this cycle that's never going to end. But attending permitting meetings, doing scheduling, budgeting, things like that could be done by, paraprofessionals, is a model that some firms are using very effectively. It's also interesting you mentioned the coder, because, one of the kind of leading ways to see new roles that might be popping up in this space in our industry is that the queries that we get on our compensation surveys of, hey, can you add this job title? And we've gotten more than one request for coder. So there's an emerging kind of thinking there that there could be an opportunity for sure. Awesome. Desta, thanks so much. That was a lot of good stuff. Desta Kimmel from Powers Brown Architecture, from 160, soon to be 200 person architecture firm. Thanks so much for joining me.
Really thank you.
With that. So next up we have Bo Newman. So Bo delivered a session. There's a few things here. Bo delivered a session at Thrive, which I want to ask you just a little bit about, Bo, when we get started. Bo is also the Chief Financial Officer for, now, Bo, let's see if I have your employee count correct here, of, let's see, what do I have for yours now that I'm looking at my notes? 240?
250, yeah, sure.
250, all right, close enough, we'll take it. Design firm Kohachi Peterson, based in Orlando, Florida, with offices in Phoenix, Boston, and Philadelphia as well. And I should also point out, Bo is a consultant here with PSMJ in the financial part of the business, valuation, ownership, transition, that stuff, which continues to be a top of mind challenge. I think one of the questions beyond how do we find talent that we see a lot of firms wrestling with is who is going to run and lead the firm tomorrow. And I don't mean tomorrow, literally, tomorrow being the next 5 or 10 years. And you know what I thought was fascinating was at one point, Frank Stasiowski, founder and CEO of PSMJ, in his opening remarks, asked the audience of 300 people, 300 or so, 300,000 or so people, 300 or so people, not 300,000. That'll be next year. How many folks were younger than 48 years old? Because PSMJ is 48 years old. And geez, I'd say 60 or 70% raised their hand. So we're starting to see that shift happen in the industry that we've been talking about for so many years. It's a long way to say that demand for the work that Bo does is really high. Bo, thanks for joining me today.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, so your session was actually at Talent Max, which was the pre-con, which most folks came early for to attend. Reframing your day job was kind of the essence of your session. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, well, the thought came about in 2019 when we were in the middle of some strategy meetings and trying to get some initiatives off the ground. And the meeting after the meeting, someone stopped by my office and said, "Hey, these are great. I just wish we could get more done." And I think if it weren't for my day job, I could push some of these forward. And I had said something similar to that, and we all were struggling with getting these initiatives through, and so that was really the genesis of the thought. And so it led me to ask the question of myself, so what is my day job? And so over the years, that thought never really left me. And so this year, it really, I crystallized it into this talk. And really, my initial draft was quit your day job to get more done. And I get it. We don't want to say we want to quit our day job, but I believe the idea is about reframing how you view what you do. Especially in our industry, I came from the public accounting world where it's very technical, just like our industry, architects and engineers. We tend to think of ourselves as accountant in my world, where I came from, or architect or engineer, structural, whatever your specialty may be. And then as leaders, we are really required to be more than just those things. We may be leading projects, but we also may have to be running the business, if you will. So that's a different skill set, it's a different way of thinking. And the idea is to reframe how you view what your day job is so that you can therefore be more effective at what you do. Our industry is full of, we're architects and engineers here. So it's a little bit different, and you can see the distinct personality types that kind of generalizing and stereotyping, if you will. And some tend to be more conservative, some more fly by the seat of their pants. So that was sort of the thought behind it, is how do we get our thoughts around strategy and leadership development and running the business and having to go out and try to figure out, are we going to expand, say, to Canada, for example, like Desta was talking about a few minutes ago. So those are all of these things that come at us and interrupt what we have defined as our day job. Sort of, that's really the thought behind why I wanted to give the talk.
So what would be kind of the first couple steps that you'd recommend somebody do to start to reframe their day job? And by the way, that's something that we hear. I think if we talk to a whole bunch of current and past circle of excellence firms, and I bet Desta would agree 100%, one of the big differentiators of those firms to the rest of the pack is being able to work on the firm as much as they work in the firm. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're getting at. So what would be kind of the first steps here to get started on this?
Yeah, what we talked about was just really 4 different things. One, you have to have tremendous focus. You have to have focus on what the problem is or what the strategy may be. Anything that you do, number 2, you would have alignment. We talked about having alignment with your overall strategy, alignment with the goals of the firm, as well as the alignment with the business needs of the firm. We talked about the why. Why would you do this? And for people to understand the why. Uh, so on the alignment piece, we're not taught necessarily to know strategy necessarily. So we talked about when you're aligning yourself, the firm needs to have a good strategic plan that's well thought out and agreed to among all parties. And when you create this alignment around your day job, the number one thing that I presented was to keep the main thing the main thing. The idea comes from a book called The Power of Alignment, where it's just that we can't have more than really one priority. As humans, we like to multitask in this day and age, but quite honestly, as we know, if we have to keep ourselves singularly focused on one thing, and the book, The Power of Alignment, talks about the main thing remaining the main thing. We talked about having a rallying cry around that alignment, making sure that whatever we do is going to be purposefully aligned with the strategy of the company, maintaining that, and setting aside personal preferences if you as you try to accomplish more with less time. We talked about the why so that if you're trying to lead a team through an initiative, for example, they need to understand the why behind it. And we talked about how features tell, but benefits sell. And again, always with that alignment in place. And people generally do not. They want to believe what you believe, and if there's a purpose that's bigger than them and then the firm, then they can more easily get behind the why of what you're trying to do. And another big thing I mentioned at the beginning, it kind of got the order out of place, but on focus, as we know, we talked about this before as we were prepping for this meeting. There's Teams, there's Yammer, there's email, there's Zoom and GoToMeeting, all of these different ways that are trying to get our attention. So one of the key things that I feel like leaders need to start to define and reframe about their day job is getting that time to just think about the business problems and how to solve those, and be a consumer of good business books. There are a lot of great books out there. We talked about Patrick Lenciani and others in how do you continue to refresh your mind and restore your mind. And we also talked about maintaining focus through doing some personality assessments to build a team that will be that you will be able to do all the tasks. And we talked about staying on target and prioritizing and minimizing interruptions and delegating or deputizing, as we said. And then we also talked about finding your influencers within the firm. Pat Lenciani, in his Working Genius book, calls them galvanizers, people who will be able to galvanize others around them to implement this strategy or whatever initiative that you're trying to bring forth. So those are the main things that we talked about in the talk for the pre-conference.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny you mentioned that is one of the other things that I often see. The firms that are able to kind of get ahead of the pack are able to kind of set aside the distractions and focus on key strategic decisions and real kind of deep thought, if you will. And that's harder now more than ever before with the constant distractions and sources of interruptions from all these different tools that we have out there. And I've also heard that's kind of a leading cause of employee burnout as well, as not being able to kind of focus and think big, think long, but just this constant kind of putting out fires and reacting to issues. That's good to hear. That's great. All right, so let's get your kind of lightning round top 3 takeaways from, and you can do Talent Max as well, Bo. I'll give you that,
Yeah.
that leeway. So Talent Max for
Mine,
five.
well, certainly. A lot of the ones I realized as I was thinking about it, and I jotted down a few notes here to glance back on, but as I was thinking about it, it really aligned with a lot of what I was talking about. I drew parallels to others. Jay McCrae talked about action learning, which was pretty powerful to me. It was really the way I came along. I was thrown into the deep end of the pool, if you will, and just told to swim, And so that was really very powerful thought on how you bring leaders to, or how you evaluate which leaders would be brought forth. You give them a project, for example, that was his analogy. You give them a project to work on and to develop, and maybe it's a business plan for a new segment of business, for example. Or maybe if you take Desta's example of her employee who had to move to Canada, and that was an opportunity. I don't know what level he was before that, but would be an example of an opportunity. Hey, you're moving to Canada, you're going to live there, why don't you try to start a business? That would be a way of testing their ability or their desire to even be in leadership. So that was one. And the other one was Jonathan Wilson on culture. I don't think I can ever get enough on culture. To me, it's something I can see at times, and things that I can't understand at times. That I get it, but I don't. So it's really elusive for me. We've chased it here at our firm quite often. And, with the last 2 years with the employee retention or lack of retention, if you will, you bring in new culture every single day, it seems. So, and again, just going off of what Desta talked about with the standards and those types of things, without a lack of process and standards in place, you're bringing in someone else's, ideas or thoughts every time you hire a new architect, for example. So that was very powerful. The third one I thought with Carl Waller was on M&A. You mentioned it at the outset of our talk here. M&A is at record levels. Never had so many. 2021 was a record year, and 22 is going to surpass that. Either you're going to be probably acquired or look to acquire, or it's going to touch almost every one of us. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, in some capacity, we'll either acquire someone. You mentioned it from the beginning. It's one of my passions, is teaching others the business side of design, of the design industry. I love that. It's why I wanted to do the evaluation studies for PSMJ. It's one of the reasons why I know ownership transition, that we've experienced it here. I've been at 3 different firms, and it was the exact same thing. One of the second firm I was with, they ended up selling because they did not have a transition plan. So it is very much on the forefront. It needs to be on the forefront of everyone's mind, even if you're not looking to acquire or be acquired. The transition to the next generation is a make or break type of scenario for a firm. We've been around 44 years here at this firm, and so we've successfully transitioned the first generation, and it was very difficult, I will say. And it's just something that's, I think that everybody needs to be thinking of how they will accomplish that.
You bet. Yeah, it's funny on culture. That is something that we're hearing more and more about, even given some firms that are in hybrid, but even in office models. And it seems to be culture kind of starts with creating a community, creating an ecosystem of people. And one of the best tips we had was a few episodes ago, the fellow from Uninet, who said even within Uninet, they have this sort of bingo chart where you have to have coffee. I think he called it coffee bingo, with other people within the firm, different offices, different wherever. Even if it's a 30-minute virtual Friday morning Zoom coffee session, to create that community and to get people talking to each other who otherwise wouldn't in the day-to-day. And that's not just a function of being hybrid or remote. It's also just a function of everybody's just so busy and things are moving so much faster. Even in mergers and acquisitions, the time from letter of intent to closing is just getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's just a function of everything moving faster. So
Sure.
keeping the culture together is critical. You bet. Bo, thanks so much
Sure. Thank you.
for sharing those tips. Really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So next up, the last one we got here, we're almost at the top of the hour, but get a little more time, and I want to have one more. We're going to load everybody up with even some more action items. We have Michael Galante. Michael, thanks for joining us here today. Michael's a business development expert, more than 30 years experience, been in and around the AEC industry for a long time, most recently with TAI Engineering. And Michael also serves on the board of directors for the Society of American Military Engineers, a group where many of us are familiar with. So Michael, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for speaking at Thrive as well.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Yeah, sounds great. So you had a session, excuse me, that talked about revenue rivers. So as I mentioned earlier, business development was sort of the last thing on people's mind a year ago, but that's starting to change, certainly in the past 3 months. So we're seeing a lot more interest in things like this. So tell me a little bit, what is a revenue river for those of us who weren't at Thrive or weren't in your session?
Yeah, thanks. And I wanted to start out with sort of an explanation of the revenue rivers versus project based, because in a fair amount of experience in business development and marketing with a focus on construction and design firms, my observation is that many firms, if not most, consider business development all new business development, new project, new a client, whatever that means, public or private. So this business development and marketing efforts are extremely focused on the quote new business development. And what ends up happening, because inherently in the industry is project based, so there's a lot of transactional things that go on. Mm-hmm. So what I made a distinction a while back is that a project is a revenue source, but there are really 4 pools or four revenue options. Strategic accounts, that's a revenue river. How do you manage a strategic account? You obviously have to secure it in order to make it a solid customer long-term relationship partnership, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Then you also have to expand, and I'll give you a real quick example of that. We're based in Maryland, and I know we work with Powers Brown in DC. And I just learned that they have an office in Houston. Well, we have an office in Dallas. There's a little bit of a geography difference, but I'm absolutely certain that our folks aren't communicating with the Powers Brown in Houston. So here's an opportunity where we consider them a good partner in the local level. There's an opportunity for us and Powers Brown, whatever the relationship is down there, to expand each other's and support each other's business and do projects together. So again, being a strategic account, solidify it locally, expand it geographically, or from a discipline, it depends upon what the organization is. The other part is, the other revenue river is to reconnect and recapture old relationships. There are so many relationships that end up transactionally. It's project to project to project. And then we don't communicate with those folks again, and they go their way, our PMs go our way, and there's so much value in an easier sale to make by recapturing or reconnecting to old customers and or old contacts. Another almost instant revenue stream. And then the fourth, in my mind, is the new business development activities. So now you're creating rivers of revenue as opposed to chasing a project. What are we doing next quarter? What proposal do we have pending that we're going to close by the end of the year? And it becomes less transactional and more strategic.
Yeah. And I would imagine, did you have kind of a ratio of how much revenue you expect to come from each river, or sort of targets and that kind of stuff?
That's awesome. One of the questions in my breakout session, and I used the app for it, one of the folks in there had literally about 78% of their revenue coming from one customer. And I can't say that there are some discussions that you can say, and it's the old, you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. I work with another another fellow years ago, and that was his strategic discussion. He said, let's not put all our eggs in one basket. Let's have multiple baskets. And you really have to look at geographically. You have to look at discipline. TAI is a multidisciplinary firm. We have 5 different disciplines, and then we serve geographically different regions. So you have to look at your firm and ask yourself that very question. What is the ratio? There are some folks that work primarily on government projects, right? So, you know, little bit different than the private sector. There are some folks that are very disciplined or technically specific. So you have to ask yourself, how far does that band go? But it's a very valid question.
Sure, you bet, you bet. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit here. Your 3 key takeaways from Thrive. And they could be Talent Max too if you were there. But what were some of the things that jumped out at you, Michael?
Yeah, and I realize there's a time frame, and I'm going to sort of make an announcement now. I'm actually I'm moving to a new firm as of Monday.
Congrats.
And the reason why I say that, because it's valid or relevant to this question. The three takeaways, and I have to say that Carl's discussion on M&A hit home. The reason why is the firm that I'm going to has already been involved in a transaction. It's a design build firm in Maryland. They have already gone through the investment, and they have capital behind them. So I got really lucky to listen to that discussion at lunch, and that was one of the reasons why I did make this decision to move. So his point, David's discussion on the market and the environment was critical, and that's important to me as a marketing business development person. I'm taking the new role as a director of business development, so those things are important. We're going to be looking to acquire additional firms. We're going to be looking to acquire additional construction capabilities. So I have to do some market research that way. It's been clear that the intent is to grow geographically. So I'm interested in David's regional and geographic market information. And then the third point, if I don't mind blow my own horn, I'm going to take, honestly, we've already had this discussion about the 4 rivers of revenue at the new firm. And the same pieces in my presentation that I put together is what I do starting. We've already talked about it on Tuesday after I go through the orientation stuff. So I'm very passionate about the marketing and business development being a part of the strategic planning process. It's something that we've done at companies previously to where I'm at now. I was a consultant for years, so it works. You just have to look at it individually and figure out how it applies.
You bet. Hey, quick question for you. This might be interesting. How, or have you, I guess, seen any changes in business development, kind of strategies and tactics now versus pre-COVID? Not just the hybrid virtual Zoom meetings, but the general business development strategy. Have you seen any real changes since, say, 2 or 3 years ago? How you win new work besides via Zoom more?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are others on the call, but I have to tell you that it has probably been a somewhat of a struggle. Bo's discussion about culture, virtually, et cetera. I don't think that it's changed wholesale wise, but it's a learning curve. And I mean, I've been doing this during COVID, and it's a little bit different. The biggest impact really is the amount of workforce resources available, quite frankly. I think going to market is pretty much the same. It's the real challenge is once you win it, you got to be able to execute it. And so that's the biggest struggle that I've seen.
Awesome. Thanks. And certainly the quarterly market forecast outlook data that you mentioned, that's something that Dave has shared with us here in several broadcasts over the years. And you're starting to see what was kind of a bifurcation between public and private markets, as say the public markets remaining very strong, private markets starting to cool. Even the public markets seem like they're starting to cool a little bit, but we'll see. Time will tell. The next report will be at the end of the year, and that will certainly give us a better indication where things are going. And I'm glad you mentioned Carl Wohler, our M&A consultant, that panel lunch discussion on kind of breaking, I think, some of the myths of private equity that are out there in terms of, private equity firms that aren't just in for a quick money grab and getting out. That this was kind of a longer term play. I actually brought several strategic firms together. So you're right, that was some good stuff. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. Lots of good tips there.
Appreciate it.
One other thing I wanted to mention too before we wrap up. Speaking of mergers and acquisitions, our AEC Merger and Acquisition Summit is December 1st and 2nd in New Orleans at the Royal Sonesta on Bourbon Street. That is shaping up to be a fantastic event. That's not just, there is certainly a private equity component, but it's not just that. It's also for buyers, for sellers, what's going on, what the latest trends are. That is a part of the business that I would argue has changed quite a bit since COVID. So make sure you're there if you haven't registered already, psmj.com for more info, December 1st and 2nd in New Orleans. With that, Desta, Bo, Michael, thank you so much all for joining me. Lots of good tips and tricks, I think, that we packed into the hour here. And thank you, everybody, our PSMJ Pro members, for joining us here today. We'll see you next month and have a great rest of the day. Take care, everybody.